Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside to sip your coffee, and finding a bright red notice plastered on your shed. Police car light illegal structure. Must be removed within 30 days. At first, you think it's some mistake. After all, you've had this shed for years, no complaints, no warnings, nothing. But no, the HOA, Homeowners Association, has suddenly decided that your property isn't really yours anymore. And that's when you realize, this isn't about rules. It's about power. Meet Jake. Let's call him that. A hardworking guy, minding his own business in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, until the HOA decided to flex its muscles. Jake had a simple shed in his backyard. Nothing fancy, just a storage space for tools, seasonal decorations, and some old workout equipment. It wasn't bothering anyone. But that didn't matter. Because the HOA president, let's call her Karen, because of course it's a Karen, decided she didn't like it. One day, Karen and her army of clipboard warriors show up for a random inspection. Something they had never done before. Suddenly, they're measuring fences, pointing at trees, and whispering among themselves. Then, bam, Jake gets a formal notice in his mailbox. Your shed violates HOA regulations. It must be removed immediately. Fine for non-compliance. $100 per day. Hold on, what? Face with raised eyebrow. Jake flips through the HOA rulebook. Nowhere does it say sheds aren't allowed. So, he marches over to Karen's house, expecting a logical conversation. Nope. Karen, with a smug smile, tells him, "Oh, we updated the rules last month. Didn't you read the newsletter?" What newsletter? Exactly. Over the next few weeks, the HOA escalates their attacks. Fines start piling up. Moneybag. Nasty emails flood his inbox. Envelope with arrow. Even threats of legal action. Balance scale. Jake is furious. But he's not the kind of guy to roll over. So instead of backing down, he starts digging. And what he finds? A loophole so perfect, so brilliantly ironic, it will make the HOA wish they had never messed with him. Jake knew the HOA could be petty, but he didn't expect them to turn into a full-blown dictatorship overnight. After his conversation with Karen, the fines kept rolling in, $100 per day, increasing weekly. By now, it had stacked up to over $2,000. But here's where things got worse. One morning, Jake wakes up to the sound of loud voices in his backyard. He rushes outside and, you won't believe this, there's a group of HOA board members inspecting his shed like crime scene investigators. "Sir, this structure is non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics." One of them says, flipping through a clipboard, "Excuse me, this shed has been here for years." Jake fires back. Karen steps forward, arms crossed, smirking. "That may be true, but the updated HOA regulations state that all new structures must match the architectural style of the main house. Your shed doesn't." Jake's jaw clenches. "But it's not a new structure." Karen shrugs. "Doesn't matter. It's out of compliance." And just like that, the official violation notice arrives. Not only does Jake have to remove the shed, he now has 2 weeks to do it. Or else, the HOA will take matters into their own hands. Calling in reinforcements, the city inspector twist. Frustrated but determined, Jake refuses to back down. He starts looking into city zoning laws to see if he can fight this nonsense. But before he can act, the HOA makes their boldest move yet. They call the city inspector on him. One afternoon, a man in a suit and sunglasses knocks on Jake's door. "Sir, we received a complaint about an unauthorized structure on your property." Jake can feel his blood boiling. "Let me guess. The HOA?" The inspector shrugs. "I can't say, but I will need to check the permits." Now here's the kicker. Jake did have a permit for the shed back when he first built it. He digs through his files and hands it over. The inspector reviews it, nods and says, "Well, this checks out. You're actually fine under city zoning laws." Boom. Jake is legally in the clear. But then the inspector scratches his chin. Although, according to your HOA's private regulations, they can still enforce their own guidelines. Jake's heart sinks. He realizes, even though he's legally safe, the HOA can still fine him under their own ridiculous rules. Karen smirks from across the street, arms folded, watching the whole thing unfold like a villain in a movie. Jake glares at her. That's when it hits him. He needs to stop playing defense and start playing offense. And that's when he finds the loophole that will change everything. Sitting in his home office, Jake pores over the HOA rulebook, determined to find a way out. That's when he sees it. A tiny, overlooked clause buried deep in the document. Backhand index pointing right. Any structure intended for residential use is exempt from aesthetic compliance regulations. Wait, what? Jake reads it again and again. This means that if the shed were classified as a livable space instead of a storage unit, the HOA couldn't enforce their design rules. And that's when the light bulb goes off. Light bulb. Karen and her HOA minions want to play dirty? Fine. Jake is about to turn the pettiest revenge plan into a luxury masterpiece. Jake stops fighting the HOA and pretends to comply. He stops arguing. He agrees to remove the shed. He even tells Karen that she was right. Karen, smug and satisfied, smirking face. But behind the scenes, Jake gets to work. He hires a contractor not to demolish the shed, but to convert it into a fully functional guest house. And not just any guest house, but a high-end, luxury Airbnb rental. Electricity, installed. Plumbing, added. Insulation, top tier. Hardwood floors, a kitchenette, and even a spa-style bathroom, done. This wasn't just a revenge project anymore. This was an investment. And the best part? Because it was now technically a livable space, the HOA couldn't say a single word. Karen notices and loses it. A few weeks later, Karen is doing her usual neighborhood patrol when she sees the construction. Her eyes narrow. She marches over. What's going on here? I thought you were removing the shed. Jake, holding a permit in his hand, smiles. Oh, I am. It's not a shed anymore. It's a guest house. Karen's face turns red. You can't just. Oh, but I can. Jake interrupts, handing her the HOA rulebook. Page 42, Clause 6b. Residential structures are exempt from aesthetic compliance regulations. Karen snatches the book, flipping through it frantically. Jake leans in. You wrote the rules, Karen. I'm just following them. Karen is fuming. But legally, she can't do a thing. Jake doesn't just finish the guest house. He lists it on Airbnb as a luxury rental. And guess what? Backhand index pointing right, it becomes the most popular Airbnb in the neighborhood. Guests come and go, bringing extra traffic. Automobile. Laughter and music fill the air every weekend. Musical notes. The HOA? Miserable. Karen tries one last power move. Calling the city, complaining that Jake is running a business in a residential zone. The inspector comes out, does a full inspection, and then says, he's within his legal rights. Have a nice day. Smiling face with sunglasses. Checkmate. Jake sits on his porch, sipping a drink, watching Karen lose her mind. And the best part? Backhand index pointing right, the income from the guest house pays off all the HOA fines. And then some. Money bag. Karen was furious. The guest house was thriving. Guests were coming in and out. And worst of all, Jake was making money off the HOA's own rules. She couldn't let this slide. So she escalates. Karen gathers her loyal HOA minions and calls for an emergency board meeting. Her goal? To create a brand new rule banning short-term rentals. But here's where karma strikes back hard. See, not everyone in the HOA hates Jake. Some board members secretly love the guest house. A few of them even booked it for their own visiting relatives. So when Karen tries to force the vote, she gets blindsided. One of the board members stands up and says, Karen, we've had enough. You've been abusing your power, and it's embarrassing. Karen's jaw drops. Another member adds, honestly, Jake's guest house is bringing up property values. Why are we fighting him? And then the final nail in the coffin. One of the senior HOA members motions to remove Karen as president. That's right. Backhand index pointing right, Karen gets voted out of her own HOA. Astonished face. Jake watches the whole thing go down from his porch, sipping his coffee. And the best part? Karen's house? Turns out she had been violating a few HOA rules herself. Now that she's out, the new board is actually enforcing them. Within months, Karen gets fined for heavy checkmark, her fence being 2 inches too high. Heavy checkmark, her garden gnomes violating neighborhood aesthetic rules. Heavy checkmark, running an unapproved business from home. Oh, the sweet, sweet taste of karma. With Karen out of power, Jake continues renting out his guest house, now making double what he was before. Then, one day, he sees a for sale sign in front of Karen's house. She's leaving. Jake? He can't resist. He calls the real estate agent. Backhand index pointing right, he buys Karen's house. And what does he do with it? He turns it into another Airbnb. Skull money bag. Jake went from being bullied by the HOA to completely dominating it. His illegal shed? Now a profitable guest house. His biggest HOA enemy? Gone. His revenge? Perfect. And the best part? Jake now sits on the HOA board. Smiling face with sunglasses. Oh, how the tables have turned. If an HOA tried to ruin your plans, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. Backhand index pointing down.